Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Long Game podcast with myself and my partner in crime, Jason Osborne. I will have to, at this point, do the obligatory plug for our new sponsor, ourselves. If you would like to purchase any kind of Gript merchandise, you can go to gript.ie/merch and you'll be able to pick up a mug or a t-shirt or a hoodie. Now, with that said, Jason, I'm here wearing some Gript clothing, and I thought it was fitting to wear gang colors, given that we have apparently been embroiled in some media beef, if you want to put it that way. We now have ops. I didn't think it would take us that long to achieve this sort of notoriety, but we have been called out. Me personally, by name, has been called out on a podcast, the Opinions Matter podcast, I believe it's called, where two gentlemen. I wasn't familiar with this duo, but apparently they're award-winning presenters, and they have a weekly podcast that they do, much like ourselves. They've been at it for a lot longer, and they took issue with my article wherein I discussed the Islamist threat to St. Patrick's Day events here in Ireland, and we discussed this on the podcast last week. The fact that an ISIS-affiliated terror group had made these kinds of threats. They had called on people to take action and target cultural events across Europe and North America, and one of them was the St. Patrick's Day parade. Did you listen to the segment of these individuals who were very upset that we ran with such a segment? Well, one of them was upset, and the other one seemed a little bit more amicable about the whole thing.
Yeah, to be fair to him, he said it was well within our rights to run something like that, like that. I listened to it. I was disappointed. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. I thought better of the Irish media space because undoubtedly we'll get into it. Europol responded to your queries about the terrorist promotional material in question, and they said that they were aware of it and they were monitoring it, and it was obviously worth taking into account. So if Europol is taking it seriously, I would say that these two lads, Adrian Kennedy and Jeremy Dixon, probably ought to take it seriously too. Just because the guards haven't commented on it yet doesn't mean that they won't be commenting on it in future should someone else put the question to them. But suffice to say, yeah, I was disappointed because we know in the Gript office, you and I know well that our intentions are good. We like to report the news. We like people to be informed. When ISIS says that it's threatening St. Patrick's Day, we figure that's something people might reasonably like to know, as you did when you came across it. And so to hear it sort of dragged through the mud a little bit, the article, as I say, by one of the guys more so than the other, it was a bit disappointing because there's really no need for that. But as I say, one of the guys, he was fairly disparaging of it. I mean, he said Gript Media, a news site, if you can call it that. He went on
real snarky, and was arguing that the article was based on tenuous links and that it was scaremongering to put something like that out. When, as you say, I've since published an updated form of the article. I have more information on this, which I'm yet to release. It's coming out in a drip feed form that Europol has identified this as legitimate jihadist terrorist propaganda material. So apparently it is scaremongering to report on an actual genuine threat that was made by real Islamic extremists who are targeting an event within the country. I would have thought that's just called journalism. And so I didn't really appreciate the fact that these guys didn't even reach out to me or us in advance of going to air with their segment, because if they had reached out to me, my email is publicly available, I would have been happy to provide that information for them. Or better yet, they could have done their due diligence the way I did and asked the relevant law enforcement agencies themselves, instead of just going off half-cocked and clearly not having all the facts at their disposal while discussing it for almost an hour on their weekly show. I just thought that was a little bit sloppy, if you want to put it that way. And
it was pretty humorous as well. I mean, he was skeptical of the whole thing because he said, I mean, it was in English, not some how was it he put it, some Islamic language. And I was like,
I'm not sure what an Islamic language is. That's a new one to me, because he thought that because it's in English, it couldn't possibly, or it was dubious that it would be from a terrorist group, not realizing, I guess, that There are about 1.9 billion Muslims in the world. There are Muslims in China. There are Muslims in India. There are Muslims in the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa and America and Europe. So there is no such thing as an Islamic language. And so if you're a terrorist group like ISIS and you're calling, it's a call to action. They're calling on their people in Europe and North America to carry out terror attacks. You're going to want to go with a language that lots of people in Europe and North America speak, which would be English. So I don't know where the mystery is here. I think we've cracked the case on that particular one. I thought that was
Yeah, that
kind of referenceable.
their efforts would have been in vain. I don't know, some disillusioned 20-something-year-old sitting there staring at indecipherable Arabic script, and he's like, I'm not exactly sure what ISIS wants me to do here.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's more of when like they didn't say this on their podcast, but when they'll say something like, "Oh, if you have a problem with Islam, you're racist," and of course, Islam is not a race. Islam is not confined to any one group of people on earth. The range of diversity, if you want to use that word, is enormous.
Islam's diversity seems to be growing. There was a lot of talk during the week. People in the UK in particular genuinely puzzled as to why a lot of the Western converts to Islam are ginger. I didn't realize that this was a thing before, but apparently it seems to be. So truly, Islam is for everyone, and radical Islam at that too.
Well, that should be the title of this episode. Radical Islam is for everyone. I also thought, just while we're going over the segment, both of the lads on the podcast questioned why there have been no Islamic terror attacks in Ireland, and saying that the only terrorist attacks on this island have been at the hands of Catholics, that there have been no Islamic radical attacks ever. Literally just last year, it's not confirmed, it's still going through the legal process, and so we will see what the verdict is at the end of it. I do not want to jump to conclusions, but just
Allegedly, indeed.
allegedly, well, this part is alleged. We know that a chaplain at an Irish army barracks in Galway was stabbed, and allegedly the Gardaí believe that the person behind that had a radical Islamist mindset. We also know, as we've reported many times on this podcast and on Gript, that there are a huge amount of individuals arrested. It's the second biggest cause of terror arrest in Ireland, jihadist financing of terror overseas, though that's individuals living in Ireland but sending money to ISIS or Al Qaeda or other radical groups like this. And in addition to all of that, about, I'd say, 8 years ago now, the Irish Independent did an interview with a de-radicalized Irish female Muslim. So she was an Irish woman who converted to Islam. She became radicalized, and then she became unradicalized. And so she was running to the media to say, hey, there's a problem here. This is a serious risk that people should be cognizant of. And she was effectively saying that there are about 100 to 150 radical Muslims living within the state who she believes will eventually carry out attacks here. They haven't done it yet, but this is something that they think about and discuss. And, you know, we talk about the fact that in Rathmines, the London Bridge attackers, one of them lived in Rathmines. So the idea that this is some bizarre, off-the-wall concept is simply unfounded. And if the lads on the podcast who are criticizing us aren't aware of any of the facts I just enumerated, that's fine, because there are lots of things I don't know. You know, not everybody is well-versed in every topic. But don't come at us snarkily dismissing a story when you clearly have not looked into this with any kind of depth and you don't have the facts at your disposal. That's the issue I'm having, is that we have done the research on these issues. We've done our due diligence. We've looked into the matter. You clearly haven't, and yet you are snarkily dismissing a story that we have actually researched and you haven't. That's the problem here.
Well, no, you're exactly right. And I do feel like the spirit behind a lot of this sort of approach to media that you don't like, it's the same spirit that's driving a lot of the obsession with mis and disinformation. This idea that, you know, unverified information shouldn't be circulated, but it has to be verified by very specific people. You know, it has to be verified by, depending on which body is concerned about it, has to be verified by the EU. It has to be verified by certain fact checkers and things like this. And it's like, I don't know, there's a huge difference between this story that you reported on. ISIS clearly has a precedent for promoting material like this, and doing it through certain channels, through anonymous channels, through all of these kinds of things. So, it's not like it's being issued by some page on social media that has a blue check mark on it or something like this. Uh, and then there's a complete difference between that and then between a news agency sharing irresponsible or the irresponsible sharing of false or misleading claims, I suppose is what I'm getting at. There's a huge difference between these things. It's like, I don't know. I can't help but feel that taking issue with a story like this is more so taking issue with the fact that this might start a conversation that you don't particularly want to have or that you don't particularly like. We're well within our rights, as you say, as you did, to write an article about a legitimate, it seems, awareness raising appeal from ISIS, and to let people know about that. To see, like, if people are going to be scared as a result of it, I would say that's actually more so on governments and police forces and their inability to get a handle on this issue than it is on news agencies for reporting that there might be a threat at such and such an event.
Yeah, because I think it was Jeremy. Again, I don't know who's who. I'm new to these two individuals and their work, so forgive me if I'm getting them mixed up. But I think it was Jeremy said that the article that we published would help to sow more seeds of Islamophobia and stir fear and divide people. That now, if people are at the St. Patrick's Day parade, they said, and they're walking along and they see an Arab guy, they're going to be looking at him suspiciously or questioning his motive for being there. And this mindset, I'm not saying these guys personally are responsible for this, so I want to be clear, but I think that general sentiment and that mindset in media is the same mindset that contributed to things like the Rotherham scandal in the UK and the grooming gangs, where people thought there's a legitimate threat here, it's real, it's confirmed, but we don't want to talk about it because of how other people might react. It might make people uncomfortable. It might upset certain groups. So we can't discuss it and we shouldn't discuss it, or it's irresponsible to discuss it. That's how you end up with major catastrophes. It's as you say, if there's a legitimate threat that has been made against a major cultural event, and people finding out about that become concerned, the job then is on the law enforcement, the apparatus of the state, to ensure that people are protected from the danger. It's not the job of the media to suppress information because of how people might react to it. And so I just thought that was the ridiculous standards to set when it comes to these things. They even said that terrorists come in all ideologies. Dissident Republicans commit terrorism, and anytime you go to a public event, there's a risk of terrorism. Yeah, but only one ideology has threatened St. Patrick's Day events in Ireland. If we got communications that there were neo-Nazis or whatever unionists threatening to blow up the St. Patrick's Day parade, then that would absolutely be worth reporting.
Yeah, exactly. That's
As well. But that hasn't happened yet to date. So far, we have a threat from an ISIS-affiliated Islamist terrorist group to St. Patrick's Day events, and so that's why we're talking about it, obviously.
No, you're right. I do think we're living through an age in which uncomfortable traditionally, I should put it this way, traditionally uncomfortable conversations are starting to take place. I think we spoke about this a couple of episodes ago about the dam sort of breaking around immigration conversations and things like this. And I think going along with that, you're going to see that in relation to acknowledging things like this. It's like, as these lads rightfully said, anyone can carry out a terrorist attack. That includes ISIS and people who might be motivated by radical Islam. So when you see an article like this, your first reaction shouldn't be, oh, that's a bit unsavory. Your first reaction should be, oh, interesting. Maybe, well, first of all, maybe I'll read the article and I'll give this news organization, as we are, the benefit of the doubt that they're not just making things up. But I don't know. As you said, and as we said on a previous episode, there's a massive problem when your reaction to something like this is, oh, this might cause people to see, I don't know, such and such a person or such and such a type of people in a negative light. And it's like, well, if people want to run in this like genuinely hateful direction, that is their problem. That shouldn't put the media in handcuffs, as it were, and make it so that you can't report on, as we say, genuine, aggressive, radical ideological propaganda. It's as you say, with things like the rape gang scandals in the UK, it all blows up in the end eventually. I mean, people are furious in the UK because the media neglected to report as it should have done over the years. And were we to do the same in Ireland, and were, God forbid, something to happen, people would rightfully point their finger at the media. So better to, give people information that might be of interest to them now, and let them do with that what they will. That a lot of this does come down to sort of trying to control a particular kind of narrative, and it's a deeply unhealthy way for the media to operate.
Yeah, I mean, these guys again, I don't want to besmirch both of them because they had different takes, but the general tone of the podcast was put more emphasis on criticizing us and the way we reported on it than talking about the actual situation of the potential threat that was there. You think if your first instinct when we're living in a Europe that is under attack from these sorts of events within the last year, your first instinct is to shoot the messenger. I think that tells us all about where we are.
I do get a good chuckle out of the idea of someone coming across that article, reading it in its entire reasonable entirety, and coming away and think that Ben Scallan's an awful fella, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. I'm the problem, apparently. Yeah, it's truly absurd. So next time, lads, if you have an issue with a story, I'd be more than happy to clarify anything. If you want to reach out to me, my email is publicly available. I'd even be happy to come on the show and discuss this issue further, because it's a bit sloppy to talk about these things without having done sufficient prior research and not even clarify with the person who wrote the article if you're correct to begin with. So with that said, we might move then to the Shanet election results. This is perhaps the least interesting political event that happens. Maybe that shouldn't be the case. Of course, the Shanet is interesting. It's one half of the Oireachtas, but it is indeed not the most exciting of electoral events for outsiders, but very much a nail biter for people who are on the inside. What did you think of the some of the people who came back and some of the people who didn't quite make the cut?
Yeah, well, part of the reason I think it's not particularly interesting for a lot of people is because obviously only a fraction of the population can vote, you know? So naturally, I think when you're starting off on that basis, most people are just going to tune out immediately because they think, oh, well, I've no say in it, so what do I care? But I thought, I got to say, following it, I obviously didn't cover it in depth. I'm not a political correspondent, but following it, I thought I was pretty pleasantly surprised. I thought some of the people that I think I would be impressed with, probably yourself as well, did very well. Ronan Mullen, I'm a fan. He did resoundingly well. Senator Sharon Keoghan, very well. Michael McDowell, very well. Yeah, equally people who didn't do so well. I was. I hope it's not uncouth of me to say that I was pretty happy with that as well. Hazel Chu, not her day, as it so frequently hasn't been, unfortunately, for her. And Catherine Zappone rejected as well at the ballot box. So I think all in all, if I can profile our average Gript reader, I think people will probably be fairly happy with it.
Yeah, I was surprised that both Catherine Zappone and Hazel Chu failed to get elected, because I thought there was enough of progressive out there for one or the other of them to get over the line, but apparently they both fell short. And I just feel bad for Hazel Chu because she's running out of stuff to run for at this point. I don't know what's next, the presidency maybe later in the year, or I don't know, maybe she will go for Rosa Trelay or something. It's getting to the point where there's not that many more things you can compete in, and the disproportionate level of media coverage that individual receives compared to the electoral performance over many years now is quite disparate. It's pretty interesting to see.
I think the day is probably coming with results like these that we're going to see a new political track begin, which is people who haven't seen success in national elections return to third level as mature students and decide to run for the student union presidency again. So wait for the first person to do that, because that's going to be very funny, but hasn't happened yet. But one point that I was going to say, one point that I did want to make is I think there's the Shannon is a good example. I haven't seen the exact correlation here between these different factors and the results, But I think there is probably a pretty clear link between a lot of these senators who have returned to their seats really do not get very much media airtime. Like Ronan Mullen, I don't know about you, I nearly never see him in the mainstream media. Same with Sharon Keoghan, and if you do, it's generally to slam them or to criticize them in some sort of way. Michael
Yeah,
McDowell,
sorry to interrupt you, but on that very point, did you see that the journal.ie reported Sharon's victory as controversial senator Sharon Keoghan tops the poll? I don't think she's controversial if she topped the poll. That kind
she
of
mostly
tells you
romped
that
home, yeah.
she literally blew everyone else out of the water and she came first. But apparently I've never heard them describe Eileen Flynn or somebody as controversial.
Yeah.
Because obviously controversial is not really a value judgment. You're just saying that somebody is hotly debated and that they're a little bit like Marmite. They have a lot of people who like them and a lot of people dislike them, like Trump or somebody like this. Eamon Ryan is controversial, this sort of a way. But still, it has like a snarky undertone to it, which is really not warranted given her result. It shows that she's a lot less controversial with the electorate and people who actually have a say than the newsroom of these little kind of smack talking journalists
Yeah.
that report on these things.
Now, yeah, that was kind of that was along the lines of the point I was going to make, which is that there is a real lesson in here about the power of grassroots politics in Ireland, because obviously these senators, as they certainly don't have a massive media platform, these senators who did extraordinarily well in this election, and yet they really, I know, because I would get like, I'd be on some of their mailing lists and things, so I'd be getting some of their mailing things, but they really just work their mailing lists. I presume, they're out and about in the relevant places, meeting people, talking to people who might be eligible to vote for them. Either way, the results are clear. You've got people who, as I say, are criticized and on occasion slammed in the media. I would be of the opinion, nearly always unjustifiably, if not always. And yet they did extraordinarily well. So you say controversial to the newsrooms, very popular with the average person. So I think that's probably the lesson to take away from that, which is that, probably shouldn't care too much what the media has to say in Ireland. I mean, obviously factor them in. You always should factor in, to be, I don't know, boastful or big headed at a moment, the fourth estate and what it has to say, because it's a good way to gauge the feeling of the room, usually in a functioning country. But I do think that these are a good example of just sort of putting on some good old elbow grease and getting out there and ensuring that you have your votes. The Shanet is obviously a little different because you have a much smaller catchment of people to appeal to vote for you than a national election, obviously. But I think it's an interesting dynamic at play there.
Yeah, and also we should probably throw in that Sarah O'Reilly of Aintu won a seat, which I think was
Yes.
expected. No offense to Sarah O'Reilly personally. I don't know her that well, but from what I've heard, that was a very unlikely result. Not necessarily anything to do with her or her individual merits. It was just a tough election to win in Aintu's position, and so they're probably delighted with that they managed to pull that off.
Yeah. I'd say Inter are probably pretty happy with the past couple of months that they've had, obviously upping their vote share altogether in the national election. The two TDs now that are also doubling their representation and now having a senator. I'd say that's a pretty good haul over the past couple of months.
Well, while we're on the topic of the media and the establishment more broadly being out of step with the general public, we did say that we were going to discuss the new poll in the Irish Independent, which found that the vast majority of Irish people do not support gender quotas in politics.
Shocker.
74% of people, yeah, it's shocking. Who would have guessed? 74% of people polled by Ireland Thinks said that they support promotion on the grounds of merit only, that you shouldn't get a job just because you're a woman or whatever, that it should only be on the basis of your qualifications. And 22% of people said they support gender quotas, with 4% of not sures. So that seems like an astonishing result given that gender quotas have been taken as kind of a sacred cow in this country for so long. I mean, even women 64% of women said they wanted to be on the basis of merit only and that they don't support gender quotas. What do you think of that poll and what it might say about the direction of the country?
Well, I'm going to introduce a slight tangent into this, which is to say that this is getting insane coverage over the past week and a half, and I think that insanity is doubled by the fact that there's still thousands, tens of thousands of people without power in the country. I can't fit that into my head. I don't know what to do with it. I mean, I was thinking about writing something during the week about the fact that there is nearly not enough ink in the world to supply the demand that Irish column writers have to write about gender representation amongst the ministers in the new government and things like this. Because I don't know about you, we follow the media very closely. I've heard about this non-stop for the past week and a half, possibly. I can't remember exactly. At the same time, I'm following people living in the west of Ireland who their power was restored. They lost it again. The whole area lost it. Their power check website app is full of blue because everyone has no power. And instead, everyone's talking about bloody gender representation. Couple that with the poll, the fact that, what was it, 74% of people polled say that obviously promotion should be based on merit only. Like, how do you read the room this badly? How do you just like, no wonder paper sales are bloody plummeting when you're writing things like this. And the vast majority of people sitting at home, they probably see the headline on the column and they're like, what a load of shit, and turn the page to read something they're interested in. Like, if you're looking to bump up newspaper sales, this is not the way to do it because, as you say, we just have this strange upset. And I just bookmarked it earlier for when we were going to be chatting. Social Democrats' last post on their X profile is, it is shocking that Ireland is 104th in the global rankings for female representation in Parliament. But should it really be surprising given the government party's attitude to promoting women? Just 3 women were appointed to cabinet and just 6 as junior ministers. Shameful. And it's like, I don't dare say it's a lot more shameful that there's so much airtime being given to this absolute nonsense than there is to the fact that, like, again, a massive proportion of the rural population is sitting in cold and dark still. What is it, 11 days after the storm? Unreal.
Yeah, actually, on that, because Fionn Sheehan of the Irish Independent, who I personally like, I have nothing against Fionn, but we all get it wrong sometimes. And this article, I just couldn't believe that he published this on the same day as the poll came out, because Fionn Sheehan said, Taoiseach Micheál Martin Pandley doesn't believe a lack of women in politics is a real problem. And the whole article is him castigating Fianna Fáil and Micheál Martin for not having sufficient gender balance and for not thinking that that's a major problem. The whole country doesn't think it's a major problem. Judging by a poll that was published in the Irish Independent, 74% of people, including the majority of women, don't give a rat's about this stuff. So you're probably right. I'm guessing Micheál Martin is not kept awake at night stressing and sweating about the female representation within his party beyond maybe the optics that he wants to do the bare minimum just so that they don't have people hounding them about it. I'm sure he doesn't personally care less, nor does anyone else. And that is exemplified by the fact that, according to the same poll, Fianna Fáil is the biggest political party by support, it looks like. And I don't say this as somebody, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone that I wouldn't be some major fan of Fianna Fáil, a card-carrying supporter, but that's just what the poll shows. And that Micheál Martin personally is the most popular party leader. So putting that all together, whatever outrage is here, it doesn't seem to be reaching the ordinary person on the street. Most people could not care less about this stuff, and it's just a handful of people in the Independent and the Examiner and RTE that are hand-wringing while the rest of us just get on with our lives, and we just want competent leadership, full stop. I don't particularly care what is dangling or not dangling between the person's legs if the power in my area is gone and I can't flush my toilet.
The second podcast in a row that dangling appendages have come up. So
Yeah, that's becoming a theme now.
on a roll. But I feel as though gender quotas and gender representation is one of these things that, and I say this entirely sarcastically, you have to have an IQ of 200 to get, because as clearly the vast majority of the country understands, promotion should be based on merit. You should be in government based on merit. They consist in Ireland, everywhere else, they consistently have this problem, is finding the people they want to boost the representation of to put themselves forward for these things. Like, they have to go out of their way. I mean, I've heard personal testimony from people involved in politics that they have enormous difficulty, say, finding women in different places to put themselves forward for election because it seems more hassle than it's worth. It's not something they particularly want to do, but I'm not saying this is the case everywhere, but certainly I've heard it that in many cases there has to be a push in order to get, as I say, a lot of people from underrepresented groups into politics. This isn't just the case in Ireland. We've seen some of the most gender equitable societies in the world, like the Scandinavian countries, have had instances where they pushed as much as they could in the direction of gender equality, equal representation in various industries, and yet they just couldn't reach it because people were just, I don't know, women weren't particularly interested in being engineers or something like this. It's like they were able to bump it, but after a certain point, it's just far more hassle than it's worth. So, as I say, this is it's one of those things that I feel the intelligentsia have a really hard sell on their hands because clearly the vast majority of ordinary people see straight through it. And it's like, well, if you're good at your job or you want to do it, put yourself forward. If you're good at your job, you should get promoted. If you want to put yourself forward for election, put yourself forward. It's only these big brain, as I say, 300 IQ people who think that no, we actually have to. It's a modern platitude. This idea that politics would be better if the government was representative of the society that it's representing, and it's like, why? Why would it be better? Is it not perfectly fine if you've got a bunch of competent people who say maybe aren't perfectly representative of society, but genuinely have brains in their heads and genuinely have the country's best interests at heart? I would take that in a heartbeat over a bunch of people who have to be bloody forced at borderline gunpoint into the election.
Yeah, I don't particularly care that a pillock looks like me and has a couple of attributes in common with me. Like, oh, thank God this guy is a man and has a beard. That's just like me. So I'm not going to mind now when he's crashing the economy or whatever. Like,
Did it did it did it not make your day that Owen Hayes got elected?
it did actually, yeah. I know. I was delighted with that. I think that it was sort of like a vicarious win for Ben Scallon lookalikes everywhere that he put in. So yeah, he will be getting
Your
a lot of awards.
representation increased exponentially in the doll.
Exactly, yeah, for sure. He was one of my botched clones. I've got a few of them running for different parliaments across Europe, and so the long march through the institutions is well underway. That was phase one. So on the topic of absurd nonsense, we might move on to the government dropping the plan for gender recognition for children under 16. So this was a policy that was in the previous program for government, the 2020 program, that they said that they want to allow children under the age of 16 to change their gender by law. And they never went ahead with that, presumably because they had the cop on to realize that it would result in an unmitigated shitstorm. So that was a technical commitment that was never followed through on. And as the Irish Independent notes, they have dropped that from the new program for that they're not pursuing it at all. Do you think they've come to their senses?
It's obviously hard to say what's going on inside the minds of our ministers and those in government, but I think we were chatting about it last week or the week before that. I can't quite recall that, aside from, say, the obvious shit shows like the energy infrastructure and the housing crisis, all of these things, on a social level, there does seem to be some cause for optimism on different fronts. I mean, case in point, the Shanet elections, that these common sense, reasonable people did extraordinarily well in the election. I think, again, it's very telling of the Greens' influence that a lot of this stuff was pushed so heavily in the previous government manifesto. I don't know about you. I don't think Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil have changed that much since 2020, and yet this stuff is gone from the new government manifesto. So, I mean, and obviously, I think you and I would both clearly welcome the decision to drop anything in this sort of mad gender affirming direction. I mean, a lot of the gender affirming care is based on the, I don't know how people pronounce the Y path, W path guidelines. They're one of that transgender organization very prominent in promoting, as I say, gender affirming care, which, if you want to break that down into layman's terms, is essentially just encouraging the transing of children, because it's sort of encouraging going along with whatever a child says that they think they are, or a minor says that they think they are, which is obviously insane. The CAS report out of the UK, was it last year? Time is moving so quickly. Blew a hole in that by saying that actually a lot of this stuff isn't evidence based. There's no, good basis for gender affirming care, for giving kids puberty blockers at an extreme, which is why obviously the UK banned offering puberty blockers to minors. Um, so I think that any steps away from this stuff is to be welcomed and to be encouraged. And I do think this is an important for particularly people, if you want to use this language, on the right in Ireland, is to, give credit where it's due, indicate that which is pleasing to you. I think if you're just criticizing everything all the time, to be fair to those in government, what are you supposed to do with that? How do you know which direction to move in? How do you know which steps to take? Whereas if you see something like this and you think it's good, give credit where it's due and say more of this, please, because I think that's nearly as important as offering, well placed criticism.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think about the radical left, not just in this country but in the world generally, and how
Mm.
their insatiable nature makes them so unreasonable that there's no point giving them any concessions at all whatsoever. Like, you think about a
Yeah,
for-profit type party, and all they do is scream and roar and moan and complain about absolutely everything. And then, even when you try to agree with them, even if the government on a rare issue goes, actually, you know what, I think you're right, you have a point, or maybe we should do that, then suddenly the complaint changes to, well, it's not enough and it should have been done sooner. And
yeah.
you're a hypocrite because last year you said something else and now you're saying this. And it's like, I'm trying to agree with you. I'm actually moving closer to your position and you're still screaming in my face. So why you people are not even worth
And
talking to? Why
and
not?
this isn't to say, I agree, and like this isn't to say that drive shouldn't be there to continuously change things in a good direction, but we're humans, as I say, you have to work with the feedback that you're given. So I think this is a prime example that when a story like this breaks, it's best to say like, this is a positive development, this is good, more of this, please, and then you keep pushing in the direction. But I do think this is a good one because I remember it's very important to think like the culture around these things changes, because I remember, I'm sort of, yeah, quoting a lot of anecdotal things today, but I remember a doctor who works in gynecology a couple of years ago saying to me that he believes that the progressives' dream is to change the culture, and obviously some of this is done by passing legislation. Um, like, because a lot of, say, I think sort of this gender affirming care is a prime example of it. The vast majority of doctors don't agree with uncritical, gender affirming care. Just go along with whatever the patient happens to say, and they'll feel better afterwards. It's the same with things like euthanasia, for example. There's a massive push on in the UK in particular at the moment to get that legislation through. The vast majority of doctors are against that. It's the same with abortion. The vast majority of doctors don't want to provide abortion. So there is, like, in medical formation at the moment, you come to understand that these things are wrong, and that's, we would say, correct. That's right. The best that sort of progressives can do is by changing the culture, passing legislation such that when these doctors die or retire, you've got a new culture there that brings up these doctors who are all of a sudden okay with it. And so I think that every, pushback you can have before that legislation takes place, before the culture changes, is a great victory for common sense and for the continuity of the medical profession, which is obviously in our present day such an important profession because it's where a lot of these ideological battles are fought out.
Do you think that we've really just passed the peak transgender ideology and that we've seen the back of that now? I think that that has really been fundamentally and comprehensively destroyed. The back of it has been broken. Of course, it's still there. Of course, we're going to be dealing with the residue of it for a good while. But I think that it is not anywhere near the same level of potency as it was, and that it's gone to the point where it is now embarrassing. I genuinely think politicians are embarrassed by it. And I'm not saying that Gript are mainly responsible for that or anything. I'm not taking credit for it as an organization, but I do think that just as a showcase or as an example, when I asked Varadkar if Barbie Kardashian is a woman, and he throws up and he faltered and he was kind of stammering, and you could see like the gears in his brain turning at maximum velocity, trying to think of an answer.
Yeah, it's like in his head, he just had 2 + 2 = 6. But how do I present that pleasantly? How do I present that pleasingly to Ben?
Exactly. You know what it is? I'd say it's the opposite. I'd say it was 2 + 2 = 4. And he was thinking, how can I present this pleasantly to all the psychopaths who are watching this? We're go ballistic on Twitter as soon as I say the correct answer. Because, like, Varadkar, whatever you'll say about him, he's a medical doctor. He's clearly not an idiot. Like, this guy is obviously, of a level of intelligence that he became the Taoiseach of a first world country. He's not dumb. He knows the right answer. We know the right answer. And he was just trying to think, how can I avoid saying the right answer without making myself look like a complete clown? So, and he couldn't think of anything, and he had to say, "Oh, I'm not familiar. I haven't looked into the case yet," which was obviously bogus. But anyway, the only reason I say that is when our leaders reach that level where they're embarrassed about what they believe and they're just praying to God, please don't ask me about my own policies. Please don't make me defend what I said I want to do. Yeah, at that point, it's the beginning of the end, and I think we are reaching the end of the end, if as it were, and that the whole thing is just sort of petering out in real time.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And I think that this issue, similarly, well, this one is a far more extreme example, I would say, in the gender quotas and gender representation, is that progressives always had a hard sell with this one because it's much easier for people who'd like to have reform when you can focus on hard cases as a wedge issue and force things through based on that. Whereas the internet this is where the internet was a great help because people always accuse you of, dabbling in the American culture wars when you talk about trans issues, and it's like, no, this stuff is just as uh, just as I suppose relevant in Ireland, just as relevant in the UK. So
I would say not only is it not the case that we're engaging in American culture war imports by discussing it, they are engaging in American culture war imports by bringing it here. There was no transgender movement or ideology in Ireland 10 or 15 years ago. This was not a thing that was organic to this country. They took weirdo ideology from California and airdropped it into this island. And then all of a sudden, if you say, hey, I think that's weird, I don't agree with that, you're the one who is supposedly importing a strange foreign belief system. It's literally the exact opposite. We're saying we want to believe what we've always believed in this country
yeah,
and prevented this weird anomalous material from being pushed in an Irish education system. They're the ones saying the opposite. So yeah,
well, this is why no, you're exactly right, and this is why I was saying that it's a hard sell because, like, as well as that, then you have the internet, and it shows that actually a lot of the cases that opponents of this stuff make happen. Like you have, like it's comical. It's like you do have 6'4" giants playing against teenage girls in hockey, giant men, I should say, obviously playing against teenage girls in hockey. You do have men who think that they're women causing horrendous injuries to women in various sports. God, combat sports at the forefront of those. And like it's laughable. And so when you reach that sort of, when you go beyond the hard cases that, some people might fall for and things like this, and into the territory of the visibly ridiculous and the, borderline comedic, you're fighting a losing battle. And I think some of that played into this, that there's just too much of this content on the internet. Like it was patently ridiculous. Everyone could see it. This is very much an example of like the emperor having no clothes, where for a while it was obviously a ridiculous scenario, but people were sort of afraid to point it out. That once someone did point it out, or once a critical mass of people were pointing it out, it just kept multiplying and things like this. So I feel like they played their hand. They sort of pushed too far, to put it that way. And it clearly, I agree with you. I think that this issue's on the way out, and I think that it really is only the most radical elements who are still pushing for gender affirming care for minors and for things like this, because there's no evidence supporting that this even, even if you bought into that worldview, there's no evidence to say that it helps anyone.
Yeah, and I think that Barbie Kardashian in particular here in Ireland was such a preposterous episode that it would be too extreme to be funny if you did it as a parody. If Connor Morsetches did that as a joke and the mugshot was him in makeup or something, you'd go, this is just too over the top. I can't even laugh at this, but this is something that actually happened. And so nothing will red pill the ordinary person in the street, if you want to use that internet terminology.
Yeah.
It's like something to that is so self-evidently absurd as that. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so immensely serious.
No, I agree entirely. I think this is just one that ran out of steam. I think I don't like using these terms, but it kind of captures what our listeners will understand what it means. Like, the trans issue more than anything else represents peak woke. Like, it's kind of like it got to a stage where they were really, yeah, and I think the last program for government is a good representation of that, where they have all these aspirational plans to implement trans healthcare in Ireland, along gender affirming with the gender affirming guidelines. As I say, the plan that has been dropped now to allow, what was it, under 16s to legally change their gender and things like this. Like, that's nuts. And that stuff, as I think was rightly read, whenever the 2025 program for government was being written, was realized as being, totally out of the question now, and therefore it's gone. So now again, I would say this is one that kudos.
People criticize us and outlets like us because I think on one occasion we asked the media minister at the time, Catherine Martin, what is a woman? Because that was a trending issue in the United States because of that Daily Wire film that came out with Matt Walsh and everything. So we figured we'd ask an Irish minister that. And there were people who were trying to dismiss this, liberals who were saying, oh, that's like such an unserious question, or that's so stupid, or why wouldn't you ask about something more substantive and all this?
Yeah.
Whenever I see that, I always think you say it's a stupid question, but you can't answer. How stupid is it? I mean, tell me the answer right now, and invariably they're not able to. So you only think it's a stupid question because it's a question that you can't possibly answer, given your preposterous worldview.
No, that was like it's funny. It feels like you can't even say the genius of it because it's such a simple question, and yet the idea to center the opposition around this question was very clever, because it's like, yeah, it's such a basic question, and as you say, you couldn't answer it without damning your worldview if you promoted this stuff. So I think it was absolutely worthwhile asking ministers these things, and I think it should always sort of be kept in the back seat as a kind of cudgel if any of this stuff does come back, that you're able to whip it out as like, what is a woman? Because that was the other side of the thing, that I think this was the other side of it, that a lot of this movement particularly targeted women. It wasn't so much the case that you had women who wanted to be men going into men's changing rooms and things. Now, again, this wasn't so much a concern. There's wasn't so much happening in Ireland as it was happening in, say, the US and things. But I think the fact that the same movement was at work in Ireland as was in the US, as was in the UK and elsewhere, and these were the things that were happening in these places, inevitably ended up playing a role in the conversation or in the perception of these things in Ireland, because the internet's everywhere, you have access to all of these things. So I think there was a sort of an element of all of this that very much targeted women. That's not in vogue at the moment, which obviously got the feminists on board, because it's endlessly funny to me that people like, say, J.K. Rowling are considered, nearly Nazi these days, when all they do is oppose this mad issue. Like, you and I would probably disagree with J.K. Rowling on a huge majority of things, and yeah, she's probably put into the same box as us by virtue of opposing this movement. I find that endlessly funny.
Yeah, well, it's all connected, and while we are connecting, we might connect with our audience with some more
Yes.
questions. As we mention every week, if people are Gript paid subscribers, they can go to gript.ie/questions and they can leave questions that we will pick from and answer on the show every week. We're taking 2 a week for the moment. That might change in the future, and we're trying to get to everybody eventually. So if your question isn't answered one week, that's not a problem. We may still answer it in a future episode where we have too many to get to, which is a great sign, and it shows there's an interest. So we thank everybody who is engaging so far. So will I take the first one, and will you take the second this week?
For sure, let's do it.
Stephen Kavanagh says, Dear Ben and Jason, really enjoying the podcast. Great work. Thank you very much, Stephen. Just wondering how disappointed you think Fine Gael are about their election performance, if at all. Are they just happy to form a bloc with Fianna Fáil until the end of time? Thanks. Well, thank you for the question. I'm sure they are disappointed, and I'm sure in particular Simon Harris is disappointed because he strikes me as an ambitious guy, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, people sometimes say, "Oh, you know, politicians being ambitious is like a negative trait," but the guy got elected as a TD for the first time, I believe, at the age of 24, and he has proceeded to rise through the ranks since then, and he rocketed to become the youngest Taoiseach in the history of the state. You can say, well, he shouldn't have given his record, or you know, whatever. We all have our opinions on the political leaders in this country, but with that being said, this is clearly not a lazy guy who's willing to just sit back and rest on his laurels. I think he thinks a lot about his legacy, and he wants to kind of leave his mark, is the assessment I have of him observing his career trajectory. So with all of that said, he's probably not too happy that they are second fiddle to Fianna Fáil, but I also think that they really had the odds stacked against them, given that about half of their party resigned or retired from politics and decided not to run again. So no matter what, even if they had the greatest political genius in the world running their campaign, that's a difficult position to fight a campaign from. So I don't even know if it necessarily reflects on him and his leadership per se. But yeah, I'm guessing they're not too happy about that, and they would be hoping to come back with a vengeance the next time, would be my view. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do. Like, I keep using Titanic analogies in relation to the Irish political scene over the past couple of weeks, but I do feel as though, say, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in particular are like the two people sort of vying for the highest position from the water on the Titanic as the whole thing sort of just generally sinks, because that's the way things are going. I mean, this only came to mind as you were talking, so I didn't look it up beforehand like a moron. So I'm sorry for that, Stephen. My answer won't be as good as it could have been. But if I recall correctly, I mean, if you look at, approval ratings for parties and for party leadership and things, they've just consistently declined over the past decade, I'm going to say, at least. So
yeah, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil's combined vote share has been going down with each election. So obviously they came out of the election with enough to form a government, and they're happy with that, but it was still adding to the trend of general decline between the two of them. So absolutely.
And that's a very pertinent point. I don't know how a Simon Harris or Micheál Martin you could be happy with that situation. I mean, I think you'll accept it and you'll be happy insofar as you're the Taoiseach and you're the Taoiseach and you're the ones in government and making the decisions. But in terms of, is our brand is our brand what the people want? Is it resonating with the people? The answer is clearly no, and it's declining constantly. So if I were them and I were to say ambitious, as I think you do rightly peg Simon Harris as, don't know if you can so much brand Micheál Martin that way, but I would definitely be expending all my energy figuring out how you reverse that decline. I wouldn't be sitting back on my laurels now, as you say, happy with the election result, happy with the fact that I find myself in government again, despite massive unrest. I mean, maybe they're happy with the fact that they've weathered a storm over the past couple of years, because I think it has been a very turbulent time for their government. But I think, no, if you're intellectually honest or genuinely ambitious, you would actually consider the present situation to be pretty shit, and you would realize that you have a major sort of crisis on your hands and that it needs to be resolved if your parties are going to have a serious future going forward. Because despite, I think, sort of the disorganized state of the sort of new right in Ireland, for want of a better way of putting it, that undeniable surge is coming from dissatisfaction with the alternatives, and Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are the alternatives. And indeed, they're the centerpiece of a lot of people's anger over the past couple of years because they've been the ones in the driving seat. So, no, I don't think Fine Gael would be happy with their election performance, despite ending up in government again. And I think it probably should be for their electioneering team crisis management mode, figuring out how they can appeal to a more disenfranchised people than in recent memory, anyway.
I think they're both going to have to learn, both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are going to have to learn that they cannot out liberal left wing parties, that they're not to be more progressive than the Social Democrats or Labour, and that people who want that kind of politics are going to vote for that kind of politics in those parties that embody those values. And so,
And
if you
I think
want to succeed electorally, you're going to have to reach for a different way of doing things.
mm, and I think a point that has to be made, as Stephen indicated in his question, are they just happy to form a block with Fianna Fáil until the end of time? There's a reason they keep having to form a block with Fianna Fáil. The Fianna Gael and Fianna Fáil are essentially tied at the hip now, so neither of them is popular enough to do it on their own. No party is popular enough to do it on its own anymore. They've all seen declines in their vote share. There is a sense in which these patchwork governments that we've seen over the past couple of years are, well, not a sense, this is very much the case. These patchwork governments are a direct result of voter dissatisfaction. So I think, no, not only Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, all of them ought to be at the drawing board. And obviously, I think the place they ought to be looking for figuring out what people want is looking at uh, those issues that are very taboo, for want of a better way of putting it, but that consistently come up in polls as priorities. Immigration, maybe that might be a good one for them to look at. Figure out how they can be a bit more pleasing to people on that front. And then there's things that, like, I don't know, seem to be age old thorns in the government side in Ireland: housing, health, all of these things. Neither you nor I at this late hour in the podcast are going to get into discussing what they could do to fix that. But I think the sort of social engineering project of the past decade is well and truly being thrown out. I optimistically say that.
Well, with that, would you like to take the second question there?
I will, and I should say this question gave me a bit of a chuckle when I read it, from Joseph Doyle. Should there be a woke rating on on movies and TV shows? We need to know in advance if such and such is littered with insane woke before we spend money. I think it would be a hard sell getting a woke rating on movies and TV shows, although I know exactly what you mean. I might not be the best judge of this because I'm one of these radicalized young people who thinks that a lot of our entertainment is just fairly degenerate, and not just sort of the woke stuff. Like, I think that music videos, a lot of our media is just insanely sexualized. Like, I don't think you and I are both Catholic, but I don't think you have to be Catholic to acknowledge this. Like, you might be just be watching some random show, your parents in the room, then bang, it's essentially Pornhub on the screen. So it's like, I don't know. I feel as though we could nearly do with going back to some decency standards in terms of entertainment more generally. Never mind all of the bloody nut stuff that we've had to put up with over the past couple of years. But I do.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think I said it before that I was listening to an interview with 50 Cent, and when 50 Cent, the rapper, came out in the early 2000s, he was known for very shocking innuendo, and he went for a lot of shock value in his music. And he said in a recent interview that one of the reasons he doesn't make music as much anymore, and he's mainly into television and TV production, is he said, if I was to try and do what I did with music back then, and I was going for the same kind of shock value, I would have to go so far to shock people that I would end up ruining my other businesses, and it would actually hurt my reputation, because the things I was doing back then are absolutely tame by comparison now. Like, you need to go mental like Lily Phillips to try and
Yeah,
actually surprise us. And since, by the way, not to we don't want to get into the gross issue of Lily Phillips once again, but
yeah.
just since we're bringing it up, since she's done that, several OnlyFans creators have done the same thing. And it's gotten to the point where even that's not really that shocking anymore. Obviously, it's still revolting, but it's almost like a thing that is done, and it became kind of a trend. So the bar has moved even further on some of these issues. So yeah.
I know, no, you're exactly right. Like I do feel like we were just, again, the IQ keeps increasing, but we were these IQ 500 beings over the past couple of years where we knew better than anyone who came before us. It's like taboos are only there to be shattered. Rules were made to be broken, this kind of thing. And it's like, you see things like this where you got copycat OnlyFans stars looking to sleep with like ever more people. And like the stuff is genuinely horrendous. Like Lily Phillips' friend Bonnie Blue, who featured in an article that I saw recently because you can't get away from these bloody people on X, saying that she took some young guy, the way she put it, she took some young guy's virginity before his mom came in and brought him home. And it's like, okay, so you're just after making a family really unhappy, probably making some mother extraordinarily upset, and you're here talking to the papers about it. It's like that's a degenerate thing to do, you know. I do
The
think
only way you could up the ante, you're going to get somebody who tries to, they find one of these really small micronations with a population of 50,000 and tries to sleep with everybody in that country or something like that. Like, that's got to be the next level. I hope I didn't give somebody an idea for content just there, but that's the only way you could really outdo the levels of depravity we're currently seeing. Is that
yeah.
kind of madness.
Well, what is that very funny little nation that you do see on? So they really up their social media. I don't even know it's a real nation. I think it's called Kiribati or something like this. All of its major towns are named after other European capitals. But it's like there's only a handful of people living there, so that's gonna be the next thing you're gonna see. OnlyFans stars because of Kiribati and a bid for the whole country. But just on the just to get back to Joseph's question, um, no, I don't think there should be a woke rating on things, but I do think obviously word of mouth is helpful, and I think that's why you're sort of seeing Disney's stock plummet, as it were. I think that's why Disney used to be the childhood, the kids brand. It's not anymore. Disney's reputation is trash now, and that's because they kept trying to apply, to use the term again, social engineering and incredibly, yeah, to use your words, Joseph, woke stuff into their movies. And I'm very curious to see what the reaction is to the latest Snow White that's coming out because I understand. I mean, these influences are present in it. I find it very hard to believe that Prince Charming is going to save Snow White in that one. But then when you start tinkering with the fundamental stories like this, like what are you ultimately plugging? It's your own lackluster vision that no one wants to see. So I think, yeah, where woke ratings have failed, social media and word of mouth have done a great job of turning people away from these things.
I do think it's a good idea. If we had the time, it might be fun almost to have a kind of a reviews section where we warn people in advance if something is worth seeing or not. And the only problem I would have is you'd have to come up with some kind of objective criteria for how to measure wokeness, like ppm, pronouns per minute or something. I don't know what kind of barometer you would use to do that in a non-subjective way. But in principle, I think there's something to that because yeah, it's certainly. I don't know how many times have you had the experience where you start watching a new Netflix series or movie and you're enjoying it, you're kind of getting into it, and then maybe 7 minutes in, something happens, and you go, "Oh, it's one of these pieces of crap," and then you turn it off, and you go, "Well, now I have to find something else to do," and it's just like an inconvenience that slows down the whole thing.
Yeah, no, gosh, I wish I had thought about examples of exactly that beforehand because I'm convinced that there have been things, examples like that where things started strongly and then all of a sudden it's in through the back door with sort of, yeah, nuts ideas, but none come to mind presently. But the reason they don't is because there is such a deluge of this stuff on particularly the streaming platforms. I mean, there's a broader question to be asked here about as we sort of consume more and more content, naturally studios, content creators are going to produce more and more stuff, but you can't churn out, masterpieces at the sort of breakneck pace that we have an appetite for now. So I
Unless you're this
feel like,
podcast.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Unless you're this podcast in which it's going to be Tuesday, bloody release, rain, hail, or shine. But
It's just
um,
hit after hit after hit. Like, no, we never miss. But
we
yes, go
never
on.
miss. Well, we do hope to do better and better every week, and it seems to be we're heading in that direction. Thank God. But just on, I know I do think there's something to your point, Joseph. But Yeah, as I say, it's hard to figure out how you would formulate objective criteria for this. Like, if there's a scene with a rainbow, it's like, does that give it a oak point?
Yeah, the woke matrix needs to be calculated. You see me there in a lab coat in front of a whiteboard doing like furious like fractions, trying to make make some sort of equation that can sufficiently
Yeah,
encapsulate.
this is how woke this piece of art is.
So with that, if you like media that is not woke, then you can make sure to signal that to everybody in your life by picking up a t-shirt or a mug or a hoodie at gript.ie/merch. In addition to that, if you want to have your question potentially answered next week, you can go to gript.ie/questions. For the viewers, the links to those will be on the screen. And we really appreciate everybody tuning in, asking questions, leaving comments, and otherwise engaging with the show, because we're having a lot of fun doing this and we look forward to doing it into the future. So, with
We
that
do it.
said, thank you so much for watching and God bless.
God bless.